Do you say this on your own, or have others told you about me? Jesus, of course, is here responding to Pilate's question about his identity as king. But the way the Greek phrases this question, I find personally to be very interesting. And so I'm going to represent it to you in the way that it was actually written. And I want you to be mindful of the prepositions that it uses. Do you say this from yourself, meaning from within? Or did others tell you about me, meaning from without? That might not strike you like a big deal. I would argue it touches upon something very significant. Let me explain that. You might remember a couple weeks ago, I described the scene of the Last Judgment from Michelangelo. It's painted on the back wall of the Sistine Chapel. But in the Sistine Chapel, what is probably and arguably the most famous painting of all, one that most of you are probably familiar with, is referred to as the creation of Adam. That's where God's hand and Adam's hand are almost touching. You can even find it oftentimes in people's homes somewhere. If you look at that painting, what becomes very clear up front is that the weight of the painting is most of the right side. And this is the side that depicts the Father. The Father is riding what looks like a cloak shaped in the form of the organ of the human heart. And inside of this heart, there are these various characters that are surrounding him, one of which is even Eve, that looks like she's coming out of God's side. Now, as far as God himself is concerned, he's stretched all the way out with his whole body as if he's traveled this vast chasm. Eternity into time, heaven to earth, spirit to flesh. He's reaching with all of himself, his arm and his finger in complete extension towards Adam. In other words, God, compelled by love, which is symbolized by the heart, rides the chariot of his providence, which is symbolized by the characters that he will create around him, desires Adam, and therefore all of humanity, to be with him in this communion of love, which is symbolized by his intention to connect. But something is holding God back, or rather, it looks like it's pushing God back. And I say this because his beard, his hair, all of his clothes are presented as if this great wind is forcing him in the opposite direction. Just fascinating. This all-powerful God held completely in place centimeters from the object of his love, humanity. What is holding him back? And that's when you notice Adam. His hair is not blowing. Nothing about him is straining. He's the complete contrast of God. God is reaching and Adam is laying lazily back, propped up by an elbow on a grassy hill. Even the arm he's using to reach back toward God is itself resting on his knee rather than on its own merits. He's applying such little effort toward this connection, which tells us right away the force of this wind, what's holding God back, is actually Adam. It's his free will, because he must choose love. He cannot become love's hostage. And so here we have it. God's arm and finger are totally extended, and Adam's just hangs lazily into the air, separated from God only by what they refer to as a phalange, which is that end bone of your finger. He's bent at the knuckle such that if he just erected his finger, he would entirely close the gap. Heaven itself is a phalange away. Go back to the gospel. Here's Jesus, God in the flesh. He's crossed heaven to earth, eternity into time. He's gone from throne to stable to praetorium. He's traversed religious and political landscapes to stand before Pilate and bring heaven right to Pilate's door. But Pilate's heart has to move. It doesn't even have to move a lot, but it has to choose this. Do you call me king from within yourself? Is some part of you reaching for truth? Reaching for God? Or because someone else told you about me? When Jesus says, "For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." That's what he's talking about. The one who seeks truth touches God. They hear his voice, and they find life. So my point then is really this. Heaven begins in the heart. Heaven, which is one of the 4 last things that we've been reflecting on throughout the month of November. Heaven, which we understand as our deepest joy, our total bliss, eternity of love and peace, communion with God forever, and fellowship with the saints, including the deceased members of our family who have gone before us. Heaven, the realization of all the covenants and the final conquering of evil, where there is no more death and no more pain. There's no sadness. All of that starts right here. It begins the size of a mustard seed, a tiny space made in the human heart by an appetite for the truth. Now, it's not meant to stay that way. Eventually, grace floods into that space, and it's meant to blossom into this total reciprocity of love, that we who are made in the image and likeness of God are like him, not just in our intellect and will, but in that capacity of total gift of self in love for the other, which has been made manifest in his very Son. We are to echo that love, which holds nothing back and reaches all the way for heaven's embrace. Which brings us then to probably the most important question. What holds us back? Why is Adam so lethargic in that painting? I mean, he's heavy. He looks like he's being weighed down. Because the human heart is heavy. Pilate, if you look at him, what might burden his heart? What might keep him from raising the finger? Lust for power, hatred for the Jews, his own ego, fear of failure in Caesar's eyes, a pagan culture that he's inherited from his youth, the false worldviews that the Roman Empire hands on to him. All of that and more certainly present within him, even now as Jesus is inviting him to connect, to receive heaven. And I wonder, when I see this conversation, does he? What ultimately happens with him? The story ends vaguely. He ultimately says, "What is truth?" And that just brings us back to where we started. I don't know, Pilate. Does that question come from within you, from some ache? Or is it a dismissal? I suppose it doesn't matter. What does matter is this. Paul says in his letter to the Romans, the word is near you, which takes on whole new meaning in light of that painting. God is reaching for you. He is a phalange away, riding the chariot of providence, compelled by love, inviting you into heaven's embrace. So I stand before you this morning and say, open your heart. Raise up your arm. For God's sake, stand up and reach back. Providence and paradise is waiting.